recording. And I would like to welcome everyone again for joining us for this seminar on the adversary engagement ontology. As the announcement mentioned, this project is a collaboration between MITRE, SALAB, and a number of other organizations. We just released a beta version of the adversary engagement ontology, and we hope that the seminar today, the series of talks today, will provide you with with an overview of why there is a need for an adversary engagement ontology. What is adversary engagement in terms of cyber deception and denial, and how one might be able to leverage AEO, adversary engagement application ontology, to attack adversary engagement planning, operations, and intelligence collection after operations, after interactions. Today, we are lucky to have a wonderful lineup of speakers. We have Maretta Morovitz, Maretta Orta. I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name. Maretta is from the MITRE Engage team. After which, Cory, the project leader for cyber domain ontology, will be presenting an overview of what the cyber domain ontology, the unified cyber ontology, and the application ontology such as CASE and AE are all about. And this will be followed by a brief introduction and statement from Alex Nelson from NIST, who has been contributing to this project with quite a bit of valuable feedback as well as guidance. And then, last but definitely not least, the SAIL team will be presenting the adversary engagement ontology, its current version, its structure, and its use cases through example scenarios. Now, with that, I would like to invite Maretta to see if she can share her screen and do a quick sound check. Hi, Maretta, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? I think you need to give me permission to share because it says disabled screen sharing.
It's now enabled.
Boom, look at that. Okay, hang on.
And the floor is yours.
Can you see slide?
Oh,
did that work?
Yep.
Excellent. All right.
Maretta and everyone else, just to let you know, this delay will be made up with the buffer time we've added at the end of the schedule. So all of the presentations will retain their original duration and length.
Perfect. Okay. Let me just, all right, hang on. Okay. All right. So, good morning, everyone. I wanted to spend a few minutes today talking a little bit about the way that MITRE thinks about adversary engagement and to talk a bit about the Engage framework and where it came from and where we're going with it and the resources that are available through it. So, as already said, my name is Maretta Orta. I just got married, so you might have known me as Maretta Morovitz. I switched because I forget half the time what my new last name is, but either way, Maretta fits. So starting off with some definitions. So the way that we define all of these various pieces is we like to talk about revealing and concealing facts in fiction. This is a concept, if you read Cyber Denial, Deception, and Counter Deception, a book that came out a little ways back at this point, they have a great quad chart in there where they really break out these concepts by the same lines. And so we thought it was really important to refer back to that book and kind of make that the basis of a lot of the things in how we talk about and how we define these various concepts. So quick shout out to that book. And again, it's Cyber Denial, Deception, and Counter Deception, written by a number of MITRE folks, including Frank Steck and Kristen Heckman and Alex So. It's a really great read. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. So starting with some definitions. So we talk about cyber denial. Those are revealing facts and fiction to prevent or impair an adversary's operation. On the other side of that, we have cyber deception. Here we're talking about concealing facts and fiction to mislead or confuse. And then most importantly, from Engage's perspective, is taking these two things together, coupling them with strategic planning and analysis, and talking about that as adversary engagement. And we think this term is really important because one of the things we see all the time is there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of just misunderstandings around the word deception. When you go into government and DoD spaces, military deception has sort of very specific meanings and very specific context. In the private sector, there's a lot of confusion with, is deception lying? Is deception misinformation, right? No one wants to be on the cover of the Washington Post with my company does misinformation, right? That's not what anyone wants to see. So there's a lot of just, like I said, misunderstandings and mistrust around using cyber deception. And so for this reason, we really like to talk about things as adversary engagement, because we feel like that really gets to the heart of what we're trying to do and also takes away some of that confusion around the negativity associated with deception. So now that we've sort of defined denial and deception and adversary engagement and talked about the concealing and revealing facts, I wanted to give a couple of examples of what this could really look like and what this means and how this might show up in other things outside of just the cyber realm. Oh, there we go. So I can't see anyone, so we'll do a show of virtual hand, even though I can't see you. That's okay. Who has ever put this house protected by or beware of dog sign out front of their house? Right. So that's a great example of revealing facts. I'm telling something that is true about that house or about, that business or whatever it is. What about put their lights on a timer when they went on vacation or left music playing when you left the house? Well, that's an example of revealing a fiction. No one's actually home, but you're in some way, making it look like someone's home. I like to think about the scene in Home Alone when they set up that whole fake party and they have all the, it looks like there's a whole group of people in there and it's just that one little kid. What about hidden a key in a fake rock? That's concealing a fact. And finally, you forgot to write a paper in school, so you write the first page only, you staple it to a bunch of blank pages, you rip off the blank pages, and then you tell your teacher, I don't know what happened. They must have gotten lost. That was just me. Okay. Well, that would be concealing a fiction. And since we're doing this at a university, I don't endorse this. But all of these different things are just meant to sort of show, how do we think about concealing and revealing facts and fictions? And as we go on, we can think a little bit more about what does that look like in cyber. I just want to provide a couple other sort of mental models to wrap our brains around how this could look and what the usefulness is of some of these things. So let's talk about a Where's Waldo puzzle, right? In Where's Waldo, your job, if you haven't seen one of these before, right, is to find the little guy with the hat. And I meant to find him before this, and I totally forgot to. So he's here somewhere. But what makes it really hard to find Waldo has nothing to do with Waldo and everything to do with Waldo's environment, right? You have the keys to the kingdom, if you will, and yet you still can't find Waldo because there's lots of colors, there's similar patterns, there's lots of noise. In the same way, when we think about our cyber environments, right now, if there's an intrusion and someone gets through all of our layers of, defense and depth, and they make it through to have the keys to the kingdom, if you will, they've won, right? They have access to data, they have access to, crown jewels and critical assets. But how could we turn the table? How can we add ambiguity to the environment? Make that process of I'm in, but I don't necessarily have a full understanding or a full picture easily, quickly. And how do I kind of ramp up and adjust that ambiguity? On the flip side, there might also be times where we want to lower that ambiguity, right? So if we're setting up honeypots or if we're setting up areas of our network that we know are highly monitored or we have tripwires or whatever it might be, then maybe we want to turn down the ambiguity in those environments, make our adversary feel a little bit more comfortable, like he's going to go that way, lead them towards the things that don't matter and away from the things that do. So we can start thinking about this as a knob of how do we increase the ambiguity to protect what's valuable and decrease the ambiguity in places that we want to move the adversary toward. So here I have two pictures of a park. Your job is to get from the side of the park you're on to the other side of the park. Again, I can't actually, because I'm in presentation mode, see any hands, but let's pretend that you guys are raising hands. How many people are going to take the path on the right? And how many people are going to take the path on the left? So most times when I can see the audience, the answer here is that most people are going to take that path on the left. Why? It's well lit. It has nice clear guide rails, right? I can see where I'm going and I feel more comfortable. Never have I had someone say, I'm going to cut across the grass, right? Just the fact that I put a path in front of you and said, get from one side to the other, most are going to gravitate towards that path. So how do we, again, think about that same thing in the cyberspace? How do we create the well-lit, comfortable path so that the adversary will move in the ways that we want them to? And those are the places that we're going to, again, be high levels of monitoring. We're going to have tripwires. We're going to feel like we're well defended, and make the places that we don't want them to go near our crown jewels or around the places that, that system that's been on the network for forever. And, we just can't patch it because it was made by one manufacturer that is now out of business and it's critical to our manufacturing company. And I've seen that happen in the real world. How do we make that look like the dark and scary path and make the areas that we can defend look like that nice, well-lit path? So we'll talk a little bit more now about, now that we have sort of an understanding of why we want to do this and what this could look like, about the goals of adversary engagement. And one of the big principles behind MITRE Engage is that everything needs to be goal-driven. Oftentimes when we're talking to organizations that are trying to start using deception or adversary engagement and we ask why, the answer is something along the lines of, sounds good, it sounds useful, it sounds cool, and it's not goal-driven, right? If we think about the history of deception from a military perspective, no military commander in history would ever say they're using deception for deception's sake. Deception is always about having a goal, and it's the tool you're using to get there. And so we like to adopt that same model when it comes to adversary engagement. So we break things down into three kind of categories of goals. The first one is we want to expose adversaries that are already operating on our network by triggering high fidelity alerts. This is kind of probably the most obvious use case of adversary engagement. It's where a lot of the vendor space is playing. And it's one of the sort of easy entry points because it just makes sense when we think about what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it, right? You can put deceptive documents that when you open them will send an alert. You could have deceptive users or decoy users on your network that if someone tried to use a password or log in as that user, you get an alert. You can put decoy credentials around an environment. And if one of those credentials gets used, you have a high fidelity alert, right? So think about these different ways that we can have a high level of confidence that if something is triggering that alert, something bad is happening. One of the interesting things there as well is that even when it's not something really bad, so for example, those decoy documents or even putting a decoy network share. So let's say on our CEO's desktop, we put a share that says, my tax documents or something like that. And we have a bunch of what looks like personal data. Well, even if a legitimate employee is touching that share, it still probably warrants a conversation of why are you snooping around the CEO's desktop? So really providing us with not just an understanding of what's bad, but also helping to inform maybe any behavior that's just unwanted. The second one is about affecting an adversary's cyber operations in some way that protects your organization by either decreasing the damage or scope of a compromise, reducing future targeting, or disrupting malicious operations. Personally, I think this is where some of the real power of adversary engagement lies. I think it's an area that the vendor space has not fully started playing in yet. I think there's some more advanced folks who are a bit more mature and are starting to sort of look at what this would look like in our networks. But we're kind of far as a community from this kind of mass adoption of using adversary engagement to do things like increase ambiguity in environments or, add uncertainty to an environment or just kind of create noise and background in an environment. And finally, we have a set of goals that involve eliciting intelligence from an adversary based on your sort of contextualized, timely, relevant attack surface. There's a number of different folks who I think are playing in this space. Typically, this is being done by threat intel teams who are not kind of involved with the production networks and production security. So this typically and sort of best practices for this sort of intel elicitation to happen on isolated networks that are either unattributed from any given organization or potentially look like the organization that is trying to collect the threat intelligence. There's some great examples out there of organizations generating threat intelligence in this way. I think one of the most public examples is HSBC has a threat intel team, and they spoke at RSA last year, as well as ShmooCon last year, about their work using cyber deception and adversary engagement to elicit threat intelligence. And this is actually, I'm going to go back a little bit about kind of where MITRE got started, but it actually involves this threat intelligence elicitation space. So we got started in adversary engagement about 10 years ago at this point, because we had too much time spent on indicators from others that weren't always relevant to us. It was difficult to discover much on a production network. There was little to no information on post-compromise TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, and there were few options for post-compromise incident response. So we started to put a lot of effort into changing the game. And for us, adversary engagement was the way to do that. And so we ran an initial adversary engagement operation as a result of a real compromise. And from that, we then started to run a number of operations for the subsequent years in attributed environments, unattributed environments. We had a number of different rigs that we would use in order to be able to maintain these operations. And we're able to generate a lot of really valuable threat intelligence. And so actually one of our biggest sort of ways of sharing this threat intelligence out with the community has been through attack. So obviously today attack is much bigger than just deception. But the initial kind of humble beginnings of attack was most of that intelligence was coming through the adversary engagement operations that MITRE was running. At the time, we weren't talking about doing adversary engagement. And so we were able to sort of share that information out through attack without having to talk about how we were getting that intelligence through these operations. But that was sort of attack's humble origins. But as I said, attack is much bigger today and has a lot more sources than just MITRE, obviously. But that was kind of our focus initially was on threat intelligence elicitation via adversary engagement. But one thing that's really important to note is that adversary engagement is not static. Adversaries change over time, an organization changes over time, global events change over time. And because of that, there's sort of this wave of where your priorities are. So for example, for MITRE's beginning, it was really important for us to understand what was going on. We really needed to be able to understand that threat landscape. But over time, that might change. And one thing that's really important is making sure that we're kind of constantly understanding what is my goal today and how do I make sure that I'm constantly adapting and adjusting my engagement so that I'm meeting whatever goals I have today. And one of the things that sort of this relies on is seeing this whole thing as a goal-driven process. And that was really the impetus for us developing MITRE Engage and wanting to put something out into the community, because we realized that this is not like other defense in-depth technologies, right? So antivirus, EDR, you can kind of deploy it and walk away. And you don't really need to put a lot of thought into the process or changing it over time. But adversary engagement does require that you do that. And so we wanted to create MITRE Engage in order to help with that. So this is the MITRE Engage matrix, and I have to apologize to everyone. If you go onto our website, we just found out there was an update over the weekend that caused a bunch of our JavaScript to break. We are fixing it. All of the data is available, and I'll pop the link in the chat so you can get the spreadsheet of data. And hopefully very soon we will have all the JavaScript fixed. But apparently there was a backend change that happened that we weren't aware of. So it is not interactive at the moment. But this is what the matrix looks like. Ordinarily, you can go through on the website and click through all of these different buckets and read more about what sort of how we define that specific piece of the matrix, some places where we've seen references to it and things like that. But for now, I want to break down the matrix into how this really can be used as a planning tool. So on the end, we have what we talk about as our strategic action. So this is what helps us bookend our operations with strategic planning and analysis. In the middle, we have engagement actions. And so this is how you're driving progress towards the defender's strategic goals. If we start slicing the other way across the top, we have goals. So these are the big outcomes you're trying to achieve. And what's really important here is everything is always viewed downwards through those goals. It really helps us remember that this is a goal-driven process. One level down from that, we have our approaches. So that's the means by which you're making progress. You can sort of think of this as analogous to a tactic in attack. The reason it's just not the word tactic is so that when we're mapping between attack and engaged, we're not talking about attack tactics and engage tactics. And then finally, one level down from that, we have activities. So these are the concrete techniques that you're going to use to make progress and to really go at your approach. Again, this is similar to a technique, but for that same reason, we didn't want to use the same word. Each of the activities in the center, in those engagement activities, those are each mapped to attack. And the way we think about this is that when an adversary does something, so pick a given T code and attack, there is some vulnerability that exposes, and we can take advantage of that through an engage activity. So, for example, phishing is one of the activities one of the techniques. There I go. I said there are different words and I'm still mixing them up. Is one of the techniques in attack. When an adversary conducts phishing operations, they lose control of the email that they are sending, right? If it's a phishing email, they have to send it in your space. They have no idea who is on the other end actually clicking it, whether it's a real person, whether it's actually in a production network. And so the deception opportunity, the engagement opportunity is that you can use things like lures, you can use things like personas. And so that's how we sort of think about mapping all of these. And so you'll see on the attack website, on the engage website, that we have all of these different things that are all mapped back. So you can start to plan out, these are the key codes and attacks that I'm most worried about. And here's my engagement space given that. One thing to note is that Engage is not meant to be viewed as a finished product. We don't want to tell you how to shrink wrap your engagement operations because then they're not really going to be useful for the community. What we are really trying to present is an adjustable set of guide rails to help the community chart a path forward. We have a number of different sort of themes of content. And again, it's really all starting with our operations. How do we help the community to also adopt this technology space in a way that is effective and most productive? So this is going to be really quick. I just want to share a couple quick thoughts on the future of adversary engagement. The MITRE, as you can see, sort of has had a long history with this. And as I already sort of told, attack was part of that. For us, we really want to help the community to better use this technology. And we're really spending a lot of time and focus on kind of helping this get out into the public and helping other folks be able to use the technologies that we've used for a long time. For us, we think that, cyber adversaries are a never ending stream, and we really do need a vitamin, a painkiller. Companies below the cyber poverty line are in real trouble, and their insecurities is everyone's insecurities. And threat to intellectual property and critical infrastructure rise to the level of national security threat. Nope, I just lost my little cookie thing. There we go. And really, ultimately, we want to know, how do we look at these different problems, helping small companies, helping sort of with threats to intellectual property and critical infrastructure, and overall drive up the costs while driving down the value of adversary cyber operations. And this is really the focus for Engage in the years to come. So we hypothesize that we can scale this with collaboration, and we really believe that that's what's most important. We have a number of things that we're doing to try to foster that collaboration, this being a great example of it today. But we really want to help. So how do we go from adversary engagement at an individual organization, maybe even looking at what this looks like when a whole industry is participating in adversary engagement, and you're really having those more tailored and kind of campaign-like structures so that you can really help protect not just the organizations that are able to do this, but all the different organizations across the industry. That's a quick little sneak peek of some of the things that Engage is thinking about right now. And the last thing I'll end on is we are about to have sort of our first set of beta runs of our Engage in a Box. This is a non-technical train the trainer kit designed to help organizations think differently about adversary engagement. We'll actually be at RSA in a couple of weeks with one of these kits to talk about what we're trying to do. And it's really to help more organizations be able to start participating in using this technology and to start thinking about how we can make this kind of a more strategic action that we can participate in to help secure our companies, our critical infrastructure, and our intellectual property. And with that, I think I've used up all my time, so I will hand it over back to, I apologize, I think it's Cory next.
I think me. I hope everyone can hear me now. I'd like to thank you, Maretta. This was a wonderful presentation. We are holding Q&A for the end of the seminar. At this point, I would like to ask Cory Hall, the project lead for the Cyber Domain Ontology project, to join us. Can you show me where you downloaded the presentation, please? Is it this one? This one. Yes, this one. Okay.
You have to sign into your UNH account.
Very well. This is going to take just a moment to set up the words. You need to download it on the download too. Just show the sharing on the download. And the audio is correctly labeled. Yep.
We've already done okay.
No, to choose this.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rick. And Cory, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you guys so much. Maretta, if you're still there, can you see my slide?
I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maretta, for taking the time to talk to everybody about the adversary engagement work that you're doing. So I hope everybody, was able to learn some things there. Make sure that you prepare a lot of questions for Maretta. Here once all the talks are done. So again, thanks for the opportunity to come here to University of New Haven. It's always a pleasure to come here and work with the faculty and students on different projects over the years. So it's great to be back. Thank you, Vicky, for hosting it again. And so today, I want to just share a couple of remarks about an open source project that I'm a part of called the Cyber Domain Ontology Project. And so just a little bit about me. I work at the MITRE Corporation, a nonprofit organization that supports our federal government. And one of the roles that I have there is I'm a project leader of MITRE's work at the Department of Defense Cybercrime Center. So I appreciate my colleagues from the DoD Cybercrime Center and from NIST and from MITRE joining us today online. And so a couple of things, I've got work experience across the cyber domain, just over 20 years of experience. And one of the things that I do in part-time is I run a volunteer technologist team at Project International, which creates technologies for law enforcement investigators around the world to investigate crimes against children. And then finally, I get the honor to serve as the project chair for the Linux Foundation's cyber domain ontology project. All right, so just to kind of baseline everybody, when we talk about ontologies are frameworks for representing shareable and reusable knowledge across the domain. So like in the cyber domain here, like just show of hands, how many people work in the cyber domain or learning the cyber domain? Okay, pretty much everybody. Now, the problem is the cyber domain is very, very, very broad. And I would argue that there are at least several dozen different areas of practice within the cyber domain. And within each of those areas, we have our own unique language. So maybe like adversary engagement. Maretta and her team that are working adversary engagement, they still get to borrow from a language of thousands of concepts that most cyber practitioners would agree upon. But then within adversary engagement, there's a specific language that's foreign to other experts in other areas of the cyber domain. And so what the cyber domain ontology project is all about is developing a family of ontologies. And so I'm going to talk about some of these, but some of these ontologies include what we call the unified cyber ontology. That's our middle ontology. The case ontology is our digital forensics ontology. And then today, the team here at the university is going to talk about the brand new adversary engagement ontology. And so let's think about this in a different way. Everybody here speaks English. Now, how many of you have traveled abroad to other countries where English is also spoken? Okay, most of us. Great. So when you go from the United States to the UK, there's a lot of shared language concepts, right? You can walk into a bar and you can have a great conversation with a local. But somewhere in that conversation, they're going to start talking about concepts that you have no idea about. And so they may say something like, oh, hey, I'm going to go back to my flat. And you go, flat? What the heck is a flat? And you have to maybe ask for some clarification. You never heard that term. Well, in the United States, that's not perfect. Right? And so I've got a list of those like different concepts. And this is the same problem that we have across the cyber domain. Now, I want to give like a specific example here. On this slide, we've got the left area in cyber. I'm just going to refer this as defensive cyber operations. This may be like network defense. And then we've got digital forensics on the other side. So think about like legal process digital forensics. And in both of these areas, let's just say that there are two different organizations. They may both employ digital forensic examiners. So on the left-hand side, when you're trying to detect and respond to incidents, your local forensic examiner is going to go through and they're going to say something like, hey, I did forensics during incident response. Here's what I found. I think something illegal happened here. They're going to go to their bosses and to their legal counsel. And they're going to say, maybe we should try to get the government to help prosecute this. And so they call the local police department. The local police department sends their digital forensics examiner. And they say, oh, hey, I need to acquire forensic images from the company. I need to use my tools and processes and basically do everything that you already did, plus a little bit more. So give me all of your data, and everything that I do has to be legally defensible and repeatable. Because their work is going to lead possibly to courtroom testimony, which will then hopefully lead to prosecution. And so even though forensic examiners may work across these two, they still operate under different concepts and different process. So when we go back to thinking about these, this cyber domain of discourse, the language that we all speak, there's a lot of shared cyber domain concepts, thousands of them, in fact. And then we've got these unique application subdomain concepts. Think about adversary engagement, think about digital forensics, think about incident response. And so those communities of practitioners have to inherit the concepts from the shared domain. So let me pull this out a little bit more. So I mentioned one of the ontologies that is within this cyber domain ontology project is called the unified cyber ontology. This is our project's middle ontology. So this is where we express and document, let's just say 80% of the concepts in the cyber domain of discourse. And so these are concepts like a file, an IP address, and many, 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 many more. And those things are what we call observables. Now, there's a number of other concepts in here, like a location, or the concept of a pattern, or the concept of a tool configuration, or the concept of a tool, or the concept of data marking. We've assessed that all of these concepts up here are something, or they're concepts that are agreed upon no matter what area of the cyber domain you work in. So like Maretta and her team are working in adversary engagement, they can inherit these concepts and then reuse them in adversary engagement. So I want to just highlight, a few other application-specific subdomains, just to kind of show you how quickly we can start to understand all these different areas of practice within cyber. So I mentioned digital forensics, or digital forensic science. We have a case ontology for that. And today we're going to hear about the adversary engagement or denial and deception. But there's all these other things like cyber threat intelligence, malware analysis, supply chain risk management, auditing, vulnerability research, defensive cyber operations, and on and on and on and on. So what we're trying to do here in the cyber domain ontology project is to identify practitioners in each of these areas and then work with them over time. This is like a labor club over years to identify the practitioners, to make sure that there's at least a small industry and that there's some agreement about the taxonomy or the language that they use within that subdomain. And then we organize them and we invite them to come under the cyber domain ontology umbrella, and we start to document on ontology. And that's exactly what we did with adversary engagement. So we started with Maretta and her team's work over many, many years, and their collaborations with many researchers, and vendors, and practitioners. And they finally said, hey, we've got Engage. It's a taxonomy at the end of the day that expresses all those unique concepts. And so we said, well, maybe it's time that we can implement an application ontology that inherits from the unified cyber ontology. Right, so to put this a different way, we have the unified cyber ontology. This is our middle ontology. And application ontologies, they inherit these common concepts from the UCO. And then when we look at the application ontologies, these are the things that we're working towards right now. We've got one for digital forensics. This is the case ontology. We have a brand new one for cyber denial, deception, and adversary engagement. That's an AE ontology. And a couple other things that we're working on behind the scenes for supply chain risk, cyber threat intelligence. And then we're also working to bring on board another group from Asia who's working on an ontology for cryptocurrency analysis. Now, we oftentimes will run into organizations where they say, well, this is great and everything, but I've got some concepts that I don't want to put in public. For whatever reason, it could be proprietary or national security related. And the great thing about this architecture with the middle domain ontology and the application ontologies is that you can very easily create your own application ontology, which inherits from the middle ontology. And then you can also borrow from all the public concepts in the published application ontologies that we have. So where is this leading? Right, so we want this cyber domain ontology project to help the entire industry. Right? So I've got these gold lines up here that help us sort of think through the mission integration between these different areas of cybersecurity practice. So let's just start with supply chain risk. Right? Supply chain risk is looking and saying, hey, I'm building something, I'm delivering something. There's business process, and perhaps there's a cyber vulnerability somewhere in there. Well, we didn't know about that, and we may hopefully want to mitigate that. That mitigation may cost a lot of money. Okay, so it's not maybe something that you can go do immediately. So in that regard, the fact of the vulnerability is probably something that you want to protect. Right? You want to deny that fact from an adversary. Now, where does that lead? That creates an opportunity for a cyber denial operation, just like Maretta talked about. And so that cyber denial operation has a unique story, and an adversary engages with that story. It provides a high fidelity alert. That high fidelity alert then leads to, well, guess what? Cyber threat intelligence about the adversary. It also provides an opportunity for digital forensics, right? For digital forensics and incident response, and all the legal process and all the stuff that we're talking about. And digital forensics then provides the technical evidence that informs estimates back to cyber threat intelligence. Right? So in the real world, these practitioners have to work together. But for them to work together more efficiently, to interoperate in the future, to have all of their tools and their processes interoperate, we have to have this organized cyber domain of discourse. And that's how all the building blocks go together here. All right, and then since it's an open source project, it's really important that we have community contributions, that we have good governance and process in place. I want to share a little bit about this. Within the Cyber Domain Ontology open source project, under the Linux Foundation, we have 3 different committees. Number one, we have a project steering committee, which I have the honor of serving as the chair for. And my colleague, Alex Nelson, is on. He's also a member of this steering committee. We have the ontology committee, and then we have an adoption committee. And so these are fairly straightforward names to help us kind of understand the purpose of it. But the steering committee is really about kind of providing that tactical governance. It's what interacts with the Linux Foundation, sets the strategic direction, organizes resources, and manages project life cycles. And the ontology committee, that committee is about adjudicating and implementing changes to all of the project ontologies. It meets monthly for ontology engineering reviews, provides project software and documentation. And then lastly, there's the adoption committee. The adoption committee works with ontology adopters worldwide. So if you have a product or research effort underway, you could reach out to the adoption committee and say, hey, like, do you have some automation for me to validate my UCL JSON? Absolutely. And so we can point that to you. You could also contribute your research outputs or your open source tools to the adoption committee. And if you have change proposals for the ontology, you have a really simple process in GitHub for you to submit a change request. That will go to the ontology committee. The ontology committee will generally very quickly respond and help and make sure that the concepts that you need are then put into the ontology in a way that is or has been reviewed broadly by all of the stakeholders. So one of the things that's important here is to be able to start with a new effort, say like the adversary engagement ontology. When we think about a brand new ontology, we need to put it through a maturity, this kind of maturity process. And so we've been thinking a lot about this. And so the maturity model that we have, but we're getting ready to present this formally within the project. But this is kind of what we're thinking, right? Is when we have a new project, it's a candidate project. It just says, hey, I'm a member of a little ontology effort in a certain area within cyber, and I want to include my little application ontology within the family of ontologies. And you're going to come, you're going to make us aware of your project, and eventually you'll become a candidate project, and then eventually you'll move through this maturity model to be an approved project, a validated project, a formally managed project, and then a formally governed project. And so this allows like research teams or internal or ontology teams from companies to propose, and then they can move as fast as they want through the process. But this is a way to for us to be able to engage with the world and then onboard these application ontology efforts. All right, so there's a couple of other things that are important to know here in terms of some ongoing contributions. So we have several large digital multimedia forensics vendors who are planning API support for the JSON ontology. We have very soon we have a UCO graph exchange server, and so this will be a tool that you can download from GitHub, and you can upload your adversary engagement ontology represented in JSON LD, and this server will basically let you upload it and step through it and query it and validate it. There's some other significant efforts that are going on. The Netherlands Forensics Institute, they have a digital forensics as a service platform, and so they have been working through case UCL adoption, and we've got some open source tools, Autopsy and Network Miner, that we've been working with. And so they have some initial adoptions, and so those are tools that you may encounter and use in an academic setting, in a forensics lab. And then there's some various U.S. government agencies that are also working on adoption, like the DoD Cybercrime Center and NIST. So finally, this is my last slide. We have some project resources if you want to come visit the project on the internet. We're at the cyberdomainontology.org, and that will point you to the unified cyber ontology, our middle ontology, and then it will also point you to the published application ontology, so the case ontology and the adversary engagement ontology. So with that, I think we're going to hold questions to the very end. But again, thank you so much for having me here today to talk, and I turn it over now to Vahid so that he and his team can talk about the adversary engagement ontology.
Thank you very much. That was a very enlightening presentation, both in terms of the vision as well as the roadmap. Now, before we move on to the adversary engagement ontology presentation overview, Alex Nelson from NIST has also agreed to present a brief statement, introduction, and overview of his and his colleagues' involvement in the project. Alex, I was wondering if you're able to hear me. Are you still on the call? I see you now.
Yes. Yep.
And the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just have a brief prepared statement. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Nelson. I was the inaugural Case Ontology Committee Chair. I'm currently the UC Ontology Committee Chair, and I am also the CDO Technical Steering Committee Vice Chair. I continue to lead development of much of CDO's resources. I'm representative of the government class of community members. My employer is the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST. NIST's mission is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. I support that mission by participating in the development consensus of metrology in the sciences. My efforts at CDO are part of developing the science and metrology of cyberspace. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Alex. And I think this is now a good time to ask the SAIL team, Nancy Rose and Vivek, to join us. The presentation file is over here, and Vivek, is this going to hold up for another? I haven't shared your screen yet. So while the team is preparing the presentation, I just want to introduce the team to you. We are the Secure and Short Intelligent Learning Lab at the University of New Haven at the Technical College of Engineering. We work on research projects at the intersection of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, complex systems, and cognitive science and neuroscience. The team that has been working on developing adversary engagement applications is comprised of two of my doctoral students, Nancy Rose Piazza and Vivek Upadhyay, and we also have Ronnie Scarpa, an undergraduate research assistant, who has been contributing to this effort since its inception. And I'm Vahid Besadan. I'm an assistant professor of computer science and data science, and I'm also the principal investigator of the SAIL Lab at the University of New Haven. And I would like to return the microphone to my wonderful team to present an overview of their project. Please welcome the team.
Thank you to provide. Hello, everyone. I'm Vivek Upadhyay. I'm a PhD candidate at University of New Haven. I work with Dr. Vahid, Nancy, and Ronald on this project. So let's get started. So today we're going to present adversary engagement application ontology. So this is the outline. This is the outline of the presentation. We're going to talk about what adversary engagement in a very brief. Then we're going to talk about the motivation and objectives behind adversary engagement ontology. And then next is going to cover the AEO's design and an example of how we can make best use of it. Okay, so what is adversary engagement? Well, we all just heard the presentation from the Maretta, but I'm just going to give a very brief explanation of adversary engagement. So we want to understand how we can interact and respond to the adversary in the network. In the application way, we can use adversary engagement to plan an operation using denial and deception techniques. We can monitor and evaluate the success of an adversary operations. And the goal here is to detect the adversaries of the network, how we can actually increase their cost of operation and decrease the value of their overall operations, right? And for that, we can use the relevant frameworks that MITRE attack, which is the attacker-centric model, and MITRE engage the defender-centric model. Now, we have that frameworks in place, but how can we represent this concept in terms of graph, right? And this is where adversary engagement ontology comes in. Now, what is adversary engagement ontology? It is a candidate application ontology of the UCO, Unified Cyber Ontology. It focuses on defining and standardizing the information representation of adversary engagement in the cyber domain. So there are a few objectives, and these are the very first is to standardize the overall process that surrounds the AE. We also want to improve the consistency of planning AE operations, and we want to make sure that the documentation process and the communication with different stakeholders and across various domains becomes very seamless and easy. And because of that, any standardization that has been provided by the AE ontology, it also provides the efficient collaboration and efficient communication among stakeholders, leading to more effective adversary engagement. Right? And because of that, it contributes to the ease and consistency of integrated data flows between and across the various domains of cyber operation, and it also helps in the seamless AE operation configurations. So ideally, we should be able to represent all the concepts used for adversary engagement, but we are limited. And right now what we have done is we were able to represent the concept from the existing adversary engagement framework. such as MITRE in-case, and also the necessary concepts from that framework, like MITRE that. So the current release that we have is we just released our current beta version of AU version 0.1.8, and it's already in the GitHub. And we'll be looking forward to make more changes and release the more stable and release the upcoming version in a few months. I'm going to hand over the presentation to my colleague Nancy to describe the ontology design and process. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivek. Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy. I'm a PhD student at this lab. My work is primarily on consumption and multi-agents systems. So right here, we have an ontology overview. This diagram here is really to help us get an idea of the purpose of certain classes or concepts, and where they flow and why we introduce them. But we'll break it down. So ideally, right, as an ontology, we have the actual structure of an ontology where we have the namespace. The namespace is primarily composed of basically 5 namespaces. We have the attack, which is referral to concepts from attack frameworks, such as MITRE. We have engagement, which also overlaps a little bit with MITRE, engages some concepts. We have objectives, we have identity, and we have role. Those are inherited from UCOs, but we introduce a few of our concepts from there because they're kind of so if we expand engagement, the namespace of engagement, these are kind of the subclasses and classes of things you can find in this namespace, right? So we divided them as these kind of divisions because it helps us get an idea of how they're supposed to be used. So under actions, right? Actions specifically inherit from UCO's action class, and it has certain properties that you can look at specifically, but these are, quote, actions that perform, that entities or things can take, and which are going to be the center of some of our ontology. We have the pre-planning ideas and concepts, things that we need to really establish in order to create a plan, relate plans and events or planned events together. And then, of course, we have the things that populate them, which are the perception objects themselves, and maybe some operational things. The things in bold are more or less like the ideas and concepts that are exclusively adversarial engagement. You probably won't find them anywhere else, most likely, right? But the other ones are not bold, maybe concepts that might overlap with other domains, right? So then we need to really think about when to differentiate those concepts later on or when they're headed. So pre-planning concepts are designed to support describing MITRE engaged 10-step process for AE, like in a graph, right? So MITRE engaged uses prepare, we reference the entire process of planning, like the entire process of it as a pre-operational or a narrative phase. So expanding the second most important namespace is the objective namespace. There's really only one actual class in this namespace. It's called objective. All the rest of them are instances of objectives, and specifically when we just outline very specifically MITRE attacks and MITRE engages tactics and higher level goals, which are we use as basically. And then of course we cover a little bit of other things which can be considered like things that not necessarily get covered by MITRE, or they could be things that maybe that relate to them together and maybe a better way to express them as a whole. So. Then we have adversary image where we have identity and we have role. So identity, under the UCO identity, right, they have, we basically inherit their class for that. And we consider something called a persona and a team. So a persona, we usually just describe it as a separation of concepts of identities from real identities. It just helps clarify the orders of who people actually are and who they're acting as, right? And then we have the concept of a team. So ideally in UCO's identity, they have an organization, but we really want to specify, a subset of people who actually interact directly and coordinate for the deception operations. And that's why we need this explicit description. And then all roles by design for UCOs are instances of UCO's role class. So adversary, defender, and then all these other concepts like the purple team, those are all just. Okay, so moving on. We talked about explicitly the ontology and the purpose of certain classes and the certain structure of classes for that ontology. And now we need to talk about the usages and the intentions of why they're such, designed as such. And and the best way we can really give you an idea of why is they're divided into phases of when you process information. There's the pre-operation phase, like the pre-planning phase, the intra-operation phase, during an operation, during time, what's actually happening, and what you're modeling, and then post-operation, which is more or less the analysis phase. So the pre-operation and pre-planning of an operation is important to be able to extract and represent it, right? This is kind of like your first blueprint to go. And so equipped with the tool set that we have here from the planning segment of the meeting page, right? We need to express a sequence of events, planned events, together that relate to some sort of ordering of expectation of how a particular operation is going to go, right? So we need to be realistic and have actual concrete expressions of our expectations, and we need to express the development of resources prior to an operation. So the narrative concepts are there really to support this. Intra-operation occurs during an operation. So before it comes after the pre-planning and during when an operation is actually running to its termination. So that's what we really call intra-operation. There are some things during planning, right? When you plan things, like you have the actor in a particular environment, right? The defender that's acting as a persona. It's not something you can deploy before the operation and leave it there, right? It's actually somebody who actually interacts during an operation. So we need to be capable of expressing these kind of relationships and, in a graph in relationship to basically the narrative. So we have defenders, we have deploying and terminating honey pots during the operation runtime. All these concepts are really important to take note of when you process information. And then, of course, the type of information that you get during this phase will probably come from data sources for monitoring and logging, right? So when you monitor a particular network activity, right, you might get a whole bunch of other information as well. So it's usually there to help you get an idea of what expectations can you expect for certain phases of what information is limited information you gather from a certain phase of the activity. Okay. And then finally, there's post-operation, right? We previously addressed pre-operation and the pre-planning intra-operation concepts, and they're explicitly adversary engagement. However, post-operations are also very complex, right? Post-operation phase can have several usages, namely, like directly that we address MITRE age to understand a particular goal, right? And so that's kind of more or less describing the process of processing information, reducing information, and then coming up with a new plan for reiteration, right? But then there's also identifying when modifications or corrections are made to build a timeline of events, identify when human deduction or induction is made, so that's really important too, right? Evaluating the successfulness of a deception operation based on operational measures or gating criteria, as MITRE calls it. We are currently not equipped for supporting the evaluation and measurement of intra-operation measures of success. So during an actual mission, right, is there a measure that you can take during a measure to determine how well your operation is going? That's not something we support right now, except for when operation events align with plan events. So more or less, right, you have a plan and then you perform the operation and then you align the events together and see if you align. Okay, and then finally, the best part of this, to really enumerate how you can use adversary engagement and ontology, we have this small example. So, of course, Maretta had mentioned this Home Alone, but we will mention it again because it really is a good example of how a good defense can be, a labyrinth of many little booby traps. So, obviously, the idea is that you can see that battle plan that Kevin wrote up, right? And in some way, right, it's a blueprint. It's basically kind of like the concept of the narrative, except maybe a little bit more information. He doesn't really tell you the sequence of events that he expects to happen, but a lot of that can actually be really important to encode in during the planning phase, right? And then, of course, we have this little scene here where he has these silhouette people dancing, pretend to give the perception that there are people living and being lively in the house, even though there was none. So, right, a lot of engagement depends on something we call perception. This is really important to actually identify in an ontology. Okay, so here specifically, we're going to call ourselves we have a company called Mineral R Us, right? So we're a small yet critical rare earth mining company in New Hampshire. Our main clients are from the critical infrastructure, technology, and defense industries. Our key intellectual properties and operational procedures are stored on paper in a physical state. We're kind of old-fashioned, and this is only known by select. But we do have a small, unorganized computer network with only generic security infrastructure. We have a very small team that operates, that maintains operational technologies. And we just received an advisory notice from the federal authorities that there are rapidly growing cyber threats espionage by state-sponsored APTs that are more frequent. So in response, right, your company decides to engage in an external cybersecurity provider to assist with timely incident response and prevention. The external provider recommends the employment of active adversary engagement plans and asks you to develop a high-level deception and denial strategy. So, mentioning back a little bit from adversary engagement, we pull from this very useful tool, the fact and fiction denial and deception matrix, right? So we have fact along the column side, we have the deception techniques, deception and denial techniques on the row side, on the columns and the levels. So the idea is like here. So over here, a fact, that we have what we want to reveal is the network is in New Hampshire, the business runs a mine in New Hampshire. So that's more or less something we can confirm and something we want them to confirm so that they feel a little more secure in their assumptions. Then maybe for our fiction that we want to tell them or reveal to them, right, is that we have low value intellectual property stored on the network, and this contained within some falsified obscure files. They don't know that, right? And then we have the fact, which is for concealing, like things that we want to conceal from an adversary, so things that we want to protect. We have a business relationship with strategic partners, type of minerals mined for the strategic partners, process for mining that is essential to them, right? And the amounts of mineral mines, all that information, as well as like the company's location, safe, passcodes, or anything like that, right? So those are really the things we really want to protect. And then for the fiction that we want to quote conceal, we want have the percentage that we want to conceal is that most important intellectual property is located in this specific location, encrypted one. So the adversarial engagement ontology provides the structure needed to transform your abstract deception concept plan into graph representation. The degree of how detailed your narrative will depend on how extensively refined you want your pre-operative planning to be, right? So you may come out with this 100-page deception plan, all written in lots of paragraphs and words and lots of detail, right? But now you need to convert it into a graph, and sometimes you might realize, hey, I'm actually missing some information, and maybe I want to go refine that. The mapping process as well, right? You start with a basic structure that basically represents your deception plan from your 100-page pre-planning, right? You outline the sequence of planned events for the deception operation, then comes the following iterative process, right? So you select the deception techniques and objects according to the intended fiction, via the matrix or via that matrix method, and then you evaluate and refine it. So how does it deliver your desired fiction in the most feasible, effective, and efficient manner? So this is more or less dependent on how much resources you're willing to put out, right? It's your budget. And if it's not, right, then you repeat until you're satisfied. So to start us off, right, first thing we do is we create a narrative. The narrative is just kind of like your deception campaign. So you're able to actually distinguish the differences between a plan and the rest of the event, right? So then you create planned events. This one specifically has 2 planned events, and you can kind of see the relationship. One comes first, the next comes after, right? So the storyline follows the structure of Musio's as threads to describe partially ordered sets. So if we expand the first planned event, at the center, we have an action. So this is basically like the AE action, right? That we call actions. It's an action, and then this action has very specific properties that inherit from UCO's action, such as like the performer, the object, maybe even like the environment and those kind of things. So the performer of the deploy action is this particular person, and then what did they deploy? What object did they deploy? They deployed, quote, a honeypot. And so there's a very specific special property which is called has characterization, which links up the concepts, right? The concepts from AE to the physical world of what observables are supposed to represent. So this honeypot, it's going to be, on an actual system, maybe a device. And it's going to have this particular running server, operating system, or so forth, right? And so those lure objects, like what does it actually look like? The characterization of it is actually a PDF file, or they're obfuscated files. So this relationship can be built out, right? So this plan event more or less just tells you that a person deployed a bunch of deception objects as honeypots, obfuscated files, and the configuration of the data sources for the canary token. So the second thing that happened in this particular event is that this person deployed, right, another data source system for setting up, the security monitoring. Then comes the second event. So we expand the second event, they're all kind of in red, so you can see the separations, right? It describes the scenario which follows the first planned event, right? So there's that order of steps. And then we have the canary token that sends a signal to our data listener or data source. Then the data source alerts us that certain files are accessed on or off the network. One to model the partial observability or unobservability of actions of the adversary, but keep in mind, right, we have limited scope of observability with that, right? So therefore, you really should more or less just model events which we can verify. You can, of course, model actions by the adversary somewhere, but there's no way you're going to be able to verify or observe that. So that might be not actually accurate. And then this is just literally just the overview of how it looks together and how arrows kind of relate to each other. There's more arrows technically, but if we started putting all the arrows in right then, if we started with it. So one of the most important usages of an ontology, right, is to query from the graph information. But what kind of information can we get from standardizing the adversary engagement process? For example, let's just load into a graph, right, particular JSON-LG of the example we just went through. So maybe I have a question, and I want to know about how many deception objects were instantiated with a particular objective, which is exfiltrate. Well, the graph can't tell me that. You can tell me two. Why? Because actually there's only two obscured files, right, that are being exfiltrated from the network. What if I want to know how many distinct objectives are used during plan events that deploy deception objects? So the honeypot and maybe the files, right? Then we have direct and we have exfiltrate. Those are the two objectives that were used. And why is this necessarily important, right? Querying a graph may provide some logistics that were not immediately apparent in the pre-defining phrase, right? Maybe you want to diversify or narrow the deception techniques depending on the type of adversary you expect, right? So maybe particular adversaries in your line or niche, right, have very particular preferences for certain types of actions, right, or certain types of attack patterns, right? So therefore, maybe you want to either diversify or specify your spread of your AE object goals, right? To really cover and be a little bit more resilient towards those specific types of attack patterns. And then future developments and challenges we have. So challenges are as follows, right? As an application ontology, right? UTO, we need to stay compliant with them at all times, at least for their official versions and their full versions, right? So that's really important. Sometimes UTO has some big structural changes that also will change ours, so we need to stay compliant. We work towards facilitating seamless adoption of current tools and techniques, and also vendors. To keep our ontology explicit to adversary engagement, then we have to pick and choose which concepts that overlay between domains and figure out who gets to own that concept and who really should take on the responsibility of it, right? And we may need to possibly conflict resolute concepts when they are complete. So, for example, a lot of things we borrowed from CTI, they exist there and they kind of live there, but we may want to use them. And of course, we want to aim to be compatible with other relevant application ontologies, such as this is where you can find our particular repository, where you find the ontology, explore our website and see what we support. If you want to contribute, you can also contact us here. And then we did a small little test. Thank you, Cory, for showing this. we asked GPT-4 about what information could it gather by giving it just the JSON LD format, right? So we give it the JSON LD format and you copy and paste it in, right? And apparently GPT-4 is very, very smart about describing some of the things that are concepts that are in there, right? So objectives, storyline, events. It gives a really good idea of what we're trying to present in this JSON LD. Some things are wrong, but it's a really interesting thought that, you know, it could be processed even just by a machine learning model. And so these are the contributors, our SILAB, and then from the MITRE team, we got a lot of input from them, which was extremely helpful. We were guided by a lot of people on the MITRE teams of the direction for you, based on direction for UCO. So that was good. And then finally, any questions?
Thank you very much, Nancy. This was a wonderful presentation. I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience. But before doing so, I just wanted to add something to the very last slide that you had before the credits page on the GPT-4 sample. So last night I had a little bit of trouble sleeping. I got to play around with GPT-4 and our ontology. Now that, well, GPT-4 in the chat mode, the dollar, or ChatGPT 3.5 has seen this example of JSON LD, you can then ask it to convert the textual description into a JSON LD. And that's one of the things that we are going to explore as one application, or at least one tool that is built on top of this work. There's the scope of utilization, adoption, and expansion and extension is quite wide and large and promising, particularly when it comes to automation. With that, I would like to thank you again, and I would like to open the floor to questions from the audience. If you are online, please feel free to raise your hand. If you are in person, raise your physical, actual hand. And the questions do not necessarily have to be limited to the final presentation. I believe Maretta and Alex are still with us, and Cory is with us in the lecture room. So while we are waiting for questions, I can go first. So, in the industry, the cybersecurity industry, who and what sort of development or service provider would be able to immediately adopt the AE application?
I guess.
Cool.
So primarily, right, one of our particular targets of interest for our new audiences is basically the creators and the managers of the session technologies. So there are a bunch of vendors, such like Ativo, Elusive, Trap7, TrapX, Rapid7, which produce these, handy dandy toolkits for deception operation officer engagement, right? It'd be really useful for them to add support to exporting their information from their systems into some representation using our ontology and background. And that might be really useful for one transferring information over to other partners and other people how they're interested in analyzing that data. But two, also keeps it standardized and keeps it formal, so that it's more comprehensive.
Thank you, Nancy. And do we have any questions from the online audience? Sorry for blocking your camera view. I guess you've done such a great job in presenting the work. There are absolutely no questions, so I'm going to ask another question to get the ball rolling. I'm sorry I can't just let you go this easily. This is so fascinating, even to me, who's been involved in the development. So I remember we had to go through multiple revisions of our design for the ontology classes and so on. What are the major concerns in terms of upcoming revisions and their alignment and compatibility with UCO that you think the user community should be aware of and keep an eye out for?
From what I know, there are certain proposals that are being proposed or are going to be implemented or are on the table where some of the properties are going to full cover, we're going to be modifying some of these concepts like action class. It's going to cover some other concepts that we initially had an alternative for, but then we had to remove it because it would complicate the design process for integrating these stuff. So it really depends. We kind of standardize our current ontology based on UCO's 1.00 version, right? And so we want to keep that main support for that. If the UCO comes out with another official version, a static version or something like that, then we'll have to go back and revise that to come up and they basically say, hey, you can still use the first version, right? But be aware that there's going to be differences when you try to use a newer version of UCO, right? So then you have to go and pick your dependencies of which critical versions you want to stay with.
Thank you. Still no questions? Can I keep going? I have many of them.
If I may respond to that answer. Hi, Alex Nelson again. Speaking on my role as UCO Ontology Committee Chair. When UCO released its 1.0 version back in, I think it was September of last year, we made a commitment to follow semantic versioning, specifically SEMVer 2.0. You can see it at semver.org. That commitment is that we will not introduce backwards incompatible changes until the next major release. And by operational rhythm, that release was going to be planned for, if we were in a crunch and found something horrible, 6 months. That would be about next week. We are not finding such an urgent need for a 2.0 right now. So we are planning at around a year. We would do our first 2.0 release introducing backwards incompatible changes. So anything that you see in version 1.0 or 1.1, which we're on right now, or 1.2 coming out in the next couple of weeks, anything you see in there will still work with shackle validation. So the conformance checking system until our 2.0 release. And with our first backwards incompatible change set after the SEMVer 1.0 release, we'll have like a discussion among the ontology committee. We're going to flag something as a warning. When do we start flagging as an error? We've had some people say we need a year for our engineering teams before you say it's an outright error. That kind of feedback is what we look forward to getting from the community as we plan for our 2.0 release. Nance, if there is something that comes in as a potential new feature, it might step on your toes because you said, I really wanted that. But if it's available in UCO, it's available to the broader application space as well. So it's actually somewhat to your benefit to have something implemented further upstream for availability purposes. But if we do get something that does look like it's in the middle layer instead of the application layer, it's good to know that we're actually meeting the application layer needs.
And can I add? Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm good. I'm done.
I was going to concur with this. Sean Barnum, with MITRE, also heavily involved throughout founding UCO, a lot of the stuff with CDO, and have been working closely with Vahid, Nance, all the rest of the team on the AEO stuff. I agree with Alex completely as far as the semantic versioning and major changes to UCO causing big changes up into AEO. I would suspect it's likely the changes to ACO that might trickle are probably going to be more along the lines of some of the concepts that don't currently exist in UCO, but likely should for AEO and other cross-domain stuff. So the concept of objective, that's something that's needed by lots of different application domains, but it's not there right now. So AEO has defined it internally right now. There's things like that. There's some of the things that will be part of the CTI application domain ontology when that gets submitted in as just like AEO is. So it'll likely be things like that when there is the more natural place for that concept to be defined, either in UCO or a different application ontology, it would be simply a matter of within the AEO can still deal with that concept. It's primarily its namespace that would change. So, right, so the namespace for that concept, you would just reference it from UCO or reference it from like CTI, and it shouldn't structurally change anything, but it would probably cause a little bit of a ripple up on, hey, well, now you guys, AEO no longer has to worry about being the native keeper of the torch for one of those things that really primarily belongs somewhere else. You would be able to reference and use it from somewhere else. I think that's likely to be more of the changes that trickle up rather than anything big structural UCO stuff like Alex was saying, where the governance is trying to keep those things to a minimum, right? Especially as more application domain ontologies come in, those sorts of ripples become waves very quickly. So the governance process is very much intended to minimize that.
Thank you very much, Sean and Alex. That was both helpful and a little bit reassuring. Cory, please go ahead.
So I've got one thing to add. I actually wanted to talk about this during my talk. For all the students during, one of the things that you should consider is joining, joining one of these open source projects. It doesn't have to be cyber domain ontology project, although a little biased, maybe you should. But while you're in school and you're studying for 4, 6, 8 years, maybe more sometimes, it's good to get out and take part in these efforts where you can collaborate, you can learn new things, you can apply the skills that you're learning here in the university. It also gives you the ability to meet lots of people from industry. You may find mentors there, you may find future employers there, you may find future technical collaborators there. And so, over the years, with this ongoing engagement with the University of New Haven, we've actually had a number of students over the years from UNH come and participate in this open source community. So the offer is still open for any students that are interested in coming and joining. And so, what might we be looking for? Certainly we're looking for computer scientists to come and join our adoption committee. There's definitely a big demand. We need testers. We need people to help us just manage concept development. We need people to help us manage change, just managing change proposals as they come in. And there's a myriad of other things. And so based on what you saw today, if you see something in there and you're like, hey, I'm really interested in that one thing Cory talked about, or Nance talked about, or Maretta talked about, just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to maybe give 1 hour a month, to volunteer for this, or 2 hours a month or something. You certainly can work that with your faculty members to maybe incorporate that into focused study, especially for graduate and PhD students. It's probably a little more applicable there. And also, if you're interested in contributing or helping recruit other ontology efforts that you might know about to come and join this effort, we certainly would welcome that. So just a concept. But does anyone have any questions about that sort of thing, about how you might be able to participate? No? Okay. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
You need to be a U.S. citizen.
No. The Linux Foundation projects are completely open to the entire world. So no matter who you are, where you come from, you're more than welcome. I would say you should at least be a fairly conversant in the English language. That's probably about the only requirement, just because the rest of the community operates within the English language. But outside of that, there really are no hard requirements for you to participate.
Sounds like a wonderful avenue of opportunities to explore, and thank you for that.
Great.
I believe there are no other questions, so I can't explain myself. I need to ask one more. Nancy, for those who are following this live or those who are watching this recording later on, where can they go and what what they have access to start playing around with the current version of the AD application. What's available to them, the resources, and where do they start?
Alright, so the first place you should definitely go is our website. It literally outlines our intent, our motivations, and it gives you a link to our repository directly as well. So you can check out the repository. In the repository, we have an examples folder. You can run through the access tutorials, right? So there's a small explainable follow-up, like walkthrough documentation that shows you how each particular JSON ID is composed, what are the purposes of specific classes, and how to really instantiate those classes in the design. We have 3 examples, and then we have basically the big example that we showed here as well. So that should get you familiar on how you spread from explore objects and those concepts and how to instantiate them. We also have generated from Ontisfy, or Unhotspeed, which generates automated docs for our ontology, so you can check that out too. So if you wanted, short links to be able to go and see what cool classes are there or what are specifically, how to use some in terms of what's available to you, right? You can just do that too. UCO also uses it. QC uses it too. So yeah, those are really helpful documentation that you really want to get used to how to scanning your own examples using ontology.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Let us thank all the speakers of the day spent one more time. Thank you, Maretta, to Alex, to Cory, to Nancy, Vivek, Ronnie, and everyone else who helped with putting the seminar together. This is not the last event on adversary engagement ontology. We are going to go out and spread the word, and
we have a Medium post coming.
Hopefully we'll have more engagement coming, but what we would really appreciate is feedback and engagement from the industry as well as the research and academic community to help grow this effort. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.